Chris, cheers for all the work you put into this. It's just a fantastic piece of work, really. A lot of work gone into it. I mean, what was the purpose of doing this originally, do you think?
Well, it sort of came about by accident. I'd been reading stories of Ned Begg myself, in the form they were published by George Broderick, some of them a couple of decades ago in Ned Begg's original spelling, which is and punctuation or lack thereof, which is quite hard to read, especially for learners of the language. But the stories themselves are fairly easy to read and fairly interesting and amusing. And I thought, well, more of these should be available. Like a few of them have been published by Ghaelgagh, about 5 or 6 of them, and they were quite well known. But the others that are just as good and just as interesting that people weren't reading. And I thought, well, it's all very well having the Gruffalo and Alice in Wonderland and things like that in Manx, but we also need to go back to our roots and absorb the Manx that people were using when Manx was an everyday language. And people are a bit inhibited from doing that because most of the material is of a religious and a rather dry nature, all about sin and damnation and things like that, which people don't want to read about that much today for some reason. But these stories, it's got politics, it's got social history, it's got folklore, it's got everyday life. It's even a few slightly dirty stories.
Well, yes.
And Ned Begg wasn't a prude.
No, certainly not.
No. So there's one of them that he notes. I gave a version of this to Roeder, that's the fellow that was originally printing some of his stories in English, and he mentioned it in his book, and that was all. He didn't publish a story, but I hope people will be more open-minded these days.
What did you learn about the language itself from doing this?
Well, it's clear that the language has changed slightly from the Bible, the 18th century material. I'm not going to go into technical details. It's very fine details of the grammar, but there's slight changes. But at the same time, it's clearly a language that was vigorous and in good health, because although a few decades later Manx would be going out of use, when these people were young, Ned Begg himself was born in 1831, the same decade that Cregeen's dictionary came out, there was still most people in the countryside, including young people, were still speaking Manx at that time. So it's clearly he's clearly very competent in his use of Manx. So that's useful, because the Manx of the last native speakers is clearly a bit rusty. You can see that they haven't used it very much, and some of them didn't use it very much even as children. English was already taken over then. But this Manx is richer than that. In fact, it's a shame that no one recorded Ned Begg. Because he was around in the first decade of the 20th century when they were starting recordings. But some things are not meant to be. But we do have all this.
It's very rich material, really, isn't it? You know.
This is not the sum total of Ned Begg's work. There's also a large volume of stuff that he translated, including about 300 of Aesop's fables. 300
altogether,
in the Manx Museum. And various hymns and songs and poems that he wrote and things. So maybe some days someone will look at that.
Yes, well, certainly so, and it would be keen to support that. I think they're great stories, rich in idiom, and cheers for putting it together, because I think it does show what a rich and vigorous language it was then, and and even today we owe a lot to people like Ned Begg Conroy and others, really. So it's nice to see us in some kind of continuum from Ned Begg Conroy to the Bunskull to the work we're doing today.
Well, on that note, I'd just quickly like to say that I'm slightly indebted for a couple of the letters of Ned Begg that were in a library in Manchester. That Geoffrey Farragher, a direct descendant of Ned Begg, sent me copies of. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, he died last year. So,
Oh right, I
so
didn't know
just
that.
like to
Yeah.
think
Yes.
sort of in memory of him.
Yes. Well, that's a nice way to finish it. Yeah, and they add to that corpus. So
Yeah.
good night.
Lioar-lhaih Ghaelgagh.